know what I'm talking about, just down in, can you do that? One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, three, four, five, six, one, two, all right.
Yes, we are.
Got it?
So he's going to turn you up.
All right. Well, good evening. Brother Gary just asked me to introduce myself, so no, I'm kidding. He did not do that. He does know, though, that I'm in a very good mood tonight because Alabama made the playoffs. So it'll be a good night. And I noticed all of you wore your Georgia stuff again tonight. And so I really appreciate you rubbing it in, but that's quite all right. And I'm so glad you came tonight. And I want to kind of let you know, first of all, it's going to be very informal. You probably already sensed that in what we're going to do. And I want you to go ahead and be thinking in your mind if you have any questions. But in asking a question tonight, this is not, let's play stunt the preacher, okay? So if you ask me, like, how do I feel about the 12th verse of Ezekiel 13, I'm probably going to say, well, that's so easy, I'm going to let Brother Gary answer. So we'll kind of pass on all of those. But before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Can we do that and just ask the Lord to bless our time? Father, you're such a good God, And Lord, we are so grateful that everything we need to know about life and relationships and family and parenting, you have given us in your word. But more than that, Lord, you have demonstrated for us. You have demonstrated for us what it means to be a person who is loving and gracious, but consistent and just. And so, Father, I pray that tonight in our time, that the words of my mouth and the very meditations of my heart will be acceptable in your sight, that you will give wisdom and you will give understanding in all that we share tonight. For Christ's sake, amen and amen. All right. And my mic, okay. This morning they had to turn me up because it wasn't close, so I think we're good. So I want to begin tonight by just making a couple of disclaimers so that you are fully aware as we share tonight. Number one is, I am not a counselor, I am not a psychiatrist, nor am I the son of one. So please understand, a lot of times people think after I share thoughts that I have all the answers. Well, I need to tell you, I do not have all the answers. So don't be surprised tonight if I just say I'm not sure. You may want to follow up on that. But at the same time, it is grounds for discussion, because I've been in ministry now for 50 years. I literally started preaching when I was 14 years old. And by the time I was 15, I was doing about 15 revivals a year. And I'm now 65. I'll do the math for you. And I've just turned 65, which in itself is quite an experience. That was the hardest birthday I ever had. Not because it was 65. Some of you will not understand this unless you're over 65. If you're over 65, you will. But when you turn 64, every day when you go to the mailbox, there's something in your mail about you're about to turn 65. Let's talk about Medicare. Let us help you with your Social Security. Somebody reminded me every day I was turning 65 years old. And so that all is part of it. But in 50 years of ministry and life experience, you do learn some things. I don't think I've ever come across, I would have to say sometimes I occasionally hear of an experience or someone will ask a question or share something and I go, wow, that's a new one. But that happens rare and rare just because of life and because talking about prodigals and kids and so forth like that. So just on the outset, I want you to know I do not consider myself an expert. I was told years ago that an expert is anybody who has a briefcase or a satchel bag and he's at least 50 miles from home. Then you can be an expert on anything. So just so you know that. Secondly, I want to tell you a little bit about my family because Debbie and I, my wife and I, we have been married for 41 years and we were by no stretch perfect parents. I don't think anybody goes into parenting knowing all the answers. It's kind of like by the time you learn how to do it, your kids are grown. And so then you get to practice on your grandkids, and which is kind of fun. But Debbie and I, the Lord blessed us with two girls. Our oldest daughter lives in our hometown of Decatur. She actually has 2 or 3 roles that she does. One is she leads a program. She went to school at Alabama. University of Alabama. She graduated with a social work degree with a specialization in international adoptions. And so she worked for several years with helping people with international adoptions. And she and her husband, TC, he works in our ministry. They met when she was doing an internship at First Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Fell in love, got married, and I tell her, if they get a divorce, I'm keeping him because he is just a precious guy, and he leads the creative department at our ministry. They have one daughter, biological daughter. Then they have 2 adopted international. We have a granddaughter who was adopted from the Congo. We have a grandson who was, and I think I'll say this, sometimes he corrects me, I think it's Burundi, which is an African country as well. And they are just a real delight in our life. And then our youngest daughter, she is married, and her husband is the minister of worship pastor, as he calls himself, minister of music at the Green Street Baptist Church in High Point, North Carolina. And they have our two of our other grandsons. Our 2 oldest are granddaughters, the 3 youngest are grandsons. And they are technically right now 5 and 8, but they're both about to have birthdays. So as soon as we got through with lunch today and I turned my phone on, my 8-year-old grandson is just burning my phone up because he wants to know, what did you think, Pops? What did you think? Well, I have no idea what he's talking about, right? And this morning at their church, they do the lighting of the Advent candles like some churches do. And he got to read the scripture today. And he just wanted to make sure that it met my standard. He wants to know, you know. And so I had to tell him, boy, you just did great. It was really good. And he really did. He doesn't have a fear of stage. Neither of my two grandsons. I think it's because their dad is a musician and their granddad is a preacher. So it's kind of like being on stage is normal to them. But with that, and I want you to know, again, when our daughters were growing up, Debbie and I were not perfect parents. I mean, I look back now, and I made a lot of mistakes. In fact, I'm going to tell you, I got to tell you a funny one. Our oldest daughter is also a writer. And for our ministry, she's written some Bible study, but she just signed a book deal with Zondervan, which is a major publisher, on a book that she's doing that's written for women. And so I told her the other day, I said, now listen, you know, because she's like writing it now. It'll be out in 27, the first part of 27. And I said, listen, you got to let me read that before you publish it. And she's like, hey, you didn't let me read your books before you published them. And I said, well, if I'm an illustration, I need to know. And the other day I found a little comic strip that I actually sent to my daughter. And it was a secular comic strip, but it was a lady who was doing a book signing. And the name of her book was My Lousy Life. And standing by her was her mother, and her mother has her hands on her hips and says, well, if we knew you was going to be an author, we'd have been better parents. And so I send that to her. I said, please don't let us be, by any means, your illustrations in your book. But I want you to know, it wasn't easy because I was traveling extensively. Debbie was the home front, and taking care of kids. I look back now, and I really did travel too much. But I was also trying to make a living, and sometimes when you are a guest speaker in churches, you don't always have the opportunity to pick when and where and how you go. And so there were some challenges. I remember my oldest daughter was picked to be in the homecoming court, and every girl was going to be escorted by her father except my daughter because I had to preach. And it was the one time I called the pastor up and I said, look, I'll deed you half of my property, but I really need to get out of that event. It's probably the only event that in 50 years I ever called and took the initiative to cancel. And the pastor was very gracious, totally understood. We was able to move some stuff around. And that my daughter now brings that up a lot because she said, at that point, I had to come to grips. Did my dad love ministry or did he love me? And at the time, I didn't realize how much that impacted her, but it did. But looking back on that, not as perfect parents, but just a few things. In fact, let me tell you this. When I started preaching years ago, I was young, single, and had no kids, obviously. But I had a sermon I called 5 Ways to Raise a Perfectly Obedient Child. That's what I called it. And boy, I preached it, and I preached it powerfully. Well, now I have 2 daughters and 5 grandkids, and I still have that sermon, but I call it 5 things that you may want to try that probably won't work. And so I kind of am doing a variation of that tonight, all right? But let me tell you what I have observed and what I have learned about parenting. And I'm going to give you 4 simple little words, and we can unpack it for a moment. Number 1, parenting needs to be calm. Now, we don't hear this much about parenting. But here's what I have discovered. Really effective parents always are calm. They don't allow their emotions to become their parenting. Now, my parents were wonderful parents. I was an only child. I did not have any brothers and sisters. But I want to give you an illustration of that, not to put my mother in a bad light, but how I learned that I didn't have to obey until my mother had gotten emotional. If I was outside playing with friends and my mother opened the door and said, Phil, you need to come in, I didn't go in. A few minutes later, my mother would come in and said, hey, I told you, Phil, you need to come in. I wouldn't go in. But when she opened the door and said, Philip Lee Waldrep, you better get in this house, I knew I'd better get in the house, okay? Because I knew when my mother used my full name, she meant it, okay? But up until that time, but my mother would at that point have been a little bit angry with me. You know how many times I watch parents and I see, in church, I don't look for it, but sometimes you see it. But a lot of times parents are like, they just constantly are raising their voice to their kids. And I'm like, no, parenting, effective parent is when a parent always has control of their emotions. You should never punish a child or be upset with a child, even if they have pushed your last button. Always have control of your emotions. Or the way I like to say it, in the relationship of parenting, one person always needs to be an adult. And I know kids can push your buttons. Our kids could push our buttons. My grandkids can push our buttons. But the key to it is to be calm. Because if you raise your voice, what are they going to do? They're going to raise their voice. So the first thing I would tell you, if you have kids, grandkids, in parenting that I've learned, is you be the calm one in the room. You be the one who kind of is the adult. Don't allow your emotions to get control of you. That's number one. Here's the second thing. Parenting has to be clear. I have talked to a lot of kids, and I don't know why, but all my grandkids, they go to school, and we were a family where people like to come to our house. I think it's because we always had food. We give people food. Listen, if you feed teenagers, they'll show up in herds. Did you know that? They will. And it's like a herd of locusts come through when they leave. We could go to the grocery store, and when they leave, boy, there's nothing left. But now our grandkids, they like to have spend-the-night parties at our house. We live near, and my daughter's like, please take them, the whole herd. But when they're there, they want to start talking. And they begin to talk about some issues with their parents. Now, I don't sit there and try to make this a counseling session, but they talk about it. And one of the things that I consistently hear, particularly from teenagers, is that my parents get real flustered with me, but I'm not sure what they want me to do. And meaning we aren't clear about what our expectations are. So sometimes I think as much as you can, when you are dealing with your kids, if you can be clear to explain to them, this is what we're going to do. You are going to do your homework. It's not an option. We're going to get your homework done, and until you do get your homework done, then you're not going to be able to play on the Game Boy or whatever. You have to be real clear and give them the consequences. One thing kids cannot do, they cannot read your mind. They can read your heart, but they cannot read your mind. So make sure when you're dealing with kids, you're always clear. And by the way, that's not just parenting. If you're working with kids, that works real well. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, telling them one time, don't think they're going to remember it tomorrow. You have to remind them to be real clear. Here's the third thing I tell you. Be consistent. One of the things that I have noticed is I've talked with parents who have younger kids and teenage kids and even older teenage kids, is they sometimes are not consistent in their parenting. Give you an illustration. When I was a kid, where I saw this inconsistency was I grew up in a real small rural Baptist church. And almost everybody at our church was related to me. It was my mother's home church. My mother was one of 11 kids. Okay, so all my aunts and uncles and cousins, we all went to the same church. And I grew up in that church. Well, you know what I never could understood when I was little is when we went into the auditorium, we didn't have children's church now, but when we went into the auditorium, man, I could cut up and laugh and say anything I wanted, but I didn't have sense enough to know when the music started, if I said anything after that, I got carried out of the service. And let's just say my daddy, believed in spankings. So I never could understood why one minute it was funny and the next minute I got whipped. Now, as I got older, I understood that because churches started. But at the moment, I couldn't do it. But when I talk about consistency, I'm really not talking about that as much as be consistent with your words. Let me give you an example. How many times have you said to your kids, listen to me, if you don't sit down and do your homework, you are not going to get to go to Johnny's and play. And they don't do their homework, and you still let them go to Johnny's to play. One of the things I have discovered, again, don't let them react to your emotion. If you tell your kids something, you follow through with it, especially when it comes to any kind of punishment. Because if you don't do that, then here's what they'll learn. They will learn over time your words are meaningless. They're going to learn, wait until you get mad, or in a case like my mom, that you call them by their full name, then they know you're serious. But if you don't, but whatever you say, you make it real clear, here's what you need to do, and here's the consequences if you don't. Now, what most people want to do today is reverse. We want to teach our kids, and I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but a lot of times one of the failures we're making today with parenting is we want our kids, but we want to give them a reward for doing what they ought to do. Okay, and that in and of itself is not bad. But you see, if you're not careful, you will produce an adult who thinks doing normal things should get an award. And when they go to work, they have problems with employment because they don't understand why they didn't get rewarded for doing what they were hired to do. So be consistent when you do that. And the fourth thing I would say is be compassionate. Josh McDowell said something years ago when our kids were little that I heard, and it forever changed our parenting skills, our whole parenting thing. He said this: rules without relationships equals rebellion. And I've never forgotten that. That you can't just lay down the rules for your kids and be void of any relationship with them. If you are, you're going to have rebellion. Because what kids want is they want your heart. They want you to know you care about them and you love them. And words are not enough. You have to learn. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book about the 5 love languages. That's worth doing, and finding out what your kid's love language is. My oldest is words. I have to verbalize to her approval. My youngest is touch. She wants me to hug her. She wants me, just to let her know. She will literally, to this day, now she's 32 years old, is when she's at our house in Elm, North Carolina, she still will sit down by me on the couch. She just wants to be close to me. She wants to be close to her mom because her love language is touch. So hugging her, and so forth. Whereas my oldest daughter, she's not into that. She just wants me to verbally say the word, I'm proud of you, you did good, or so forth, because that's her love language. Find your child's love language. That goes a long way for them knowing they are loved. Because let me tell you, at the heart, let me tell you what every kid wants. They want to know they're accepted, approved, and they want security. That's what they want. They want to know they're accepted by you. They want to know you really like them. And they want your approval, and they'll do whatever's necessary to get your approval until they get to the point where they realize they never get it, and then they'll quit trying. But more than that, they want security. They want to feel safe with you. So just remember, and we have a whole weekend to unpack that, but just remember the 4 things that's important in parenting. Number 1 is calm. That alone will help many of you here tonight if you have young kids. Trust me. Because kids will push your everlasting nerve, okay? Be calm, be consistent, okay? Or be clear and be consistent and be compassionate. Now, is there, with all of that said, as we transition back to what I shared this morning, and we'll take some questions, the question is there any surefire way to raise perfectly good kids? And I need to tell you the answer is no. Okay? Because again, I say what I said this morning. You can do everything by the book, everything perfect, and still have a child who walks away. Because whether you realize it or not, there are things at work in your child's life over which you have no control. And I have to be honest. I was talking to the student pastor today, and I made this statement to him. I think student ministry is harder today than it's ever been. Because things that I never dreamed of, and most of you as an adult didn't dream of, now that we're facing, because, the internet and everything happens, the way kids are bullied on the internet, not just that, but stuff that people, when I was doing youth camps years ago, we worried about boys slipping off with girls. I was just talking with a student pastor this week who's a big issue in his church is he wants to invite kids to go and have them bring their friends to a student event. They're going on a trip. But he's got a problem because there's 2 or 3 girls who identify as lesbians who want to go on that trip from the high school, and yet the other parents are saying, nope, if they're going, my kids are. I fully understand that. Though those are issues that your kids are facing, if they're teenage kids, that we never faced. And one of the things that's happened in the last few years with students and even with smaller children is everything has flipped. You know, most of us, if you are 30 or older, most of us grew up in a culture where at least culture reinforced the moral values. Now, they may not have done it because of a religious reason, but at least we applauded, you know, the kids who made good decisions, or we applauded the kids who didn't do drugs, or we applauded the kids who were not sexually active. That has all changed. I went back to my high school where I graduated 3 years ago to do their high school graduation. It was the something anniversary, I forget, 50 years of our high school. And they invited me back to be the graduation speaker. And when I went back, the principal, who actually went to school with me, he said to me, he said, Phil, let me tell you how times have changed. We're graduating 68 seniors, and 7 of the girls are expecting babies. And none of them were married. Now, and that was done almost to the point, he said, the culture is almost, if you weren't pregnant, there's something wrong with you. And I'm not saying we should shame that. That's not what I'm saying. But it's almost as if culture has changed to it's not only approved, and it's applauded. And if you are different from that, it puts a lot of pressure on kids. So please understand, there's not a surefire way you can do it. The best thing you can do is you soak your kids in prayer, you do it consistently. One other thing about parenting I want to tell you, and then I'll take questions and I'll say a little more about prodigals. Another thing about parenting that I want you to remember is this. I discovered several years ago, when kids are 10 and under, they will believe anything their parents tell them, okay? I mean, really, whatever parents tell them, they'll believe, all right? And but when kids get between 10 and 12, they start having some doubts about some of that stuff, okay? I don't want to give you any illustration because we got little ones maybe in here, but think about Christmas. They start having their doubts about somebody. Up until then, you told them they believed it, right? Now they have doubts. Well, they start doubting everything else. But when kids get 12 and older, this is going to hurt your feelings. Parents, they don't pay attention to what you say. They pay attention to what you do. When kids are teenagers, they start adapting your values. Now, I know that's pretty deep water, but it's not your words. So, for example, you can tell a teenager all day long, church is important, church is important, church is a priority, church is a priority. But if it's not a priority in you coming and you're deciding on Sunday morning whether you feel like going to church or not, you just told your teenagers by your action it's not a priority. When I grew up, now this is harsh, but it's true. When I grew up, I can remember when I was 12 or 13 years of age, I wanted to play baseball. I had not played baseball before then. I wanted to play baseball. One of the reasons I wanted to play baseball is because I could be on the team with my cousins, and they were really good athletes. My first cousin actually still holds the hitting record at the University of Alabama. He played back in the early 80s. He had 431 one year. Phenomenal. Would have played in the major leagues. He did play minor league, but he got injured his senior year and it affected his speed. But I grew up with a family of athletes. I was not one of them, but they were. But I wanted to play baseball with them. And the way the league fell, I would have been one of the older kids, which is translated from the Greek means I've been one of the bigger kids. So that means I was just by size going to be good, right? And so I want to play baseball. And my mom and dad were excited. They were glad. Here's what my dad said to me. He said, now, son, I will be at every game. I will be there. I'll be your biggest cheerleader. But Sunday and Wednesdays, we go to church. It is a priority at our house that we go to church. So I just want you to know before you start, if there's any game or practice on Sunday morning, not Sunday afternoon fine, Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday night, you won't be there. You can tell the coach that. Do you know that year was a really good year, and I made the All-Stars. And we were part of the Little League system, and I made the All-Stars. I played first base. And I can remember, I was so excited. We got to play in the regionals, and we were on our way up and doing it. And I remember the championship game. I was so excited because if we won, we were going to go to Marietta, Georgia. I don't know why it was Marietta, but it was Marietta, Georgia, and we was going to get to play in the Southeastern. We were one of the better teams. And do you know the championship game was on Wednesday night? I remember I came home from school. I got my uniform on. I knew my parents wouldn't be going because it's Wednesday night. So I'd gotten one of the other players that's going to come by and get me. And my dad came home from work, and he said, "What are you doing with that uniform on?" I said, "Well, Dad, you know tonight's a championship game." And my dad said, "By golly, I've been thinking all day tonight was Wednesday." I said, "Well, it is." He said, "Well, son, what did I tell you when you started playing? Church is a priority to us. And I told you when you began that if anything happened on Sunday or Wednesday," I said, "Well, Dad, listen, it won't be 30 people there tonight. They'll have a little Bible study, prayer requests. I can even tell you the prayer requests. I tell you what, Dad, we could even have our own prayer time praying for those requests." My dad said, "No, because in our house, it's a conviction that we're going to be in church." And I said, "Well, can't we make one exception?" And my father said something that I'll never forget. He was a very kind and very loving man. He said, "Son, you make exceptions for your preferences, but never for your convictions." And he said, "It is our conviction." The coach called my dad, who happened to be a good, active Christian in his church. "Can't you make?" My dad said, "No." And I had to go to church. I wore my uniform to church. It's a sign of rebellion. I didn't get to play. They lost. That's always been very comforting to me. They lost that night, but they did. But for a long time, I was a little upset about my dad. But the one thing I can tell you was my dad was always in church because it was a priority to us. It was a conviction to our family. And years later, I never will forget, before my dad actually died, he died in 2007, the coach who called my dad came to see my dad. And with tears streaming down his eyes, he said, "I wished I'd had your convictions." Because he said, "My son, we made a lot of exceptions. And the end result was my son today is far from God and from his family." Now, I don't think it's because they played baseball necessarily, but I use it as an illustration to help you see your kids will see what you do. Now, again, rules without relationship equals rebellion. But it is important that you are consistent. What you tell your kids and what you do matches. If you tell your kids prayer is important, but they never see or hear you pray, and I don't mean in a formal, but at home, you're sending them a message. My words are not powerful. If you tell them you believe that people who are lost without Christ are going to go to an eternal hell, if you hear you say that, but they never see you share your faith, what you do speaks louder than your words. I can tell you, if there's one thing I would tell you, actions speak louder than words. Even if your kids decide to become a prodigal and walk away, make sure they do it knowing that my parents have not been inconsistent in their personal walk with God. And one of the things I would also add, and then I'm going to take questions, is one of the things I would add, this morning I talked about guarding your words, and I said it in passing, but it's important, is make sure what you say, even when you're talking to your spouse, little ears are listening. Be careful what you say when you're critical of anything pertaining to God or church, or for that part, anything. I mean, if you're critical of school teachers in front of your kids, what they hear is that they have permission to rebel against authority. No. I was in school one time. When I was in the first grade at Christmas, my first grade teacher was terminated because she didn't teach us anything. I mean, she wasn't that good. And she didn't handle the classroom well, and she was terminated. I had 2 first grade teachers, one before Christmas, one after Christmas. And it was her first time teaching. And I did not know till years later, my dad was one of the ones who had gone to the principal along with some other parents about some of the issues. But you know what? I was so critical of her, but my dad would say, "Son, that's your teacher. You're going to respect her and you're going to obey her." I never heard my dad or mom say anything negative about her, although privately they were working to make sure they knew we had an issue here. Even when I was later in school, sometimes I have an issue, a teacher did something. My parents was always, look, you're going to respect authority, and you may not agree with what they did or how they did it, but you're going to respect it. Now, privately, my dad may have had a talk with the teacher, but at least for me, I didn't know it. So please understand when I say that, the importance of consistency. I know that's hard in today's society, but I am convinced you teach, particularly teenagers, you teach more by example than you do by your words. Words have to match, because they'll call you out on it. And let me be honest with you, my grandkids will call me out on it now, okay? But I like that. I like that accountability sometimes. And even when I tell them sometimes, oh, we're going to go do something, sometimes I honestly forget about it. They'll remind me. And that's okay, because I want to be a person they know when I say something, I mean it, okay? So that's all. That doesn't solve all your problems, but that pretty well gives you an overview of parenting. Because let me say this, while it is true, there's nothing you can do to guarantee perfectly obedient, godly kids when they're grown. That is a true statement. But I can also tell you this, is that kids that love God and serve God and remain faithful in the church almost always, now hear me, it sounds like a contradiction, it's not. You can be perfectly godly parents and have kids that walk away, just as I talked about this morning. But on the flip side, show me kids who have grown up in a home where the convictions were there, the priorities were there, the consistency was there. Those are the kids most likely who are going to stay faithful in the church. They don't expect their parents to be perfect, but they do expect their parents to be consistent. And furthermore, let me say one other thing. I keep saying all this, one more thing. But one more thing. Sometimes, guys, and women too, we like to work and we love to, that's fine. But I never will forget, years ago, I had an old wise preacher say something to me when I had overextended my schedule. I was gone quite a bit. And he set me down and he says, here's how you need to make your decisions from now on. You make a decision and the importance of what you should do based on who's coming to your funeral and where they will sit at your funeral. Well, that's odd. He said, no. The people who always sit closest to the casket are the immediate family. Behind them is extended family. Then there's friends. And then there's the people who don't go to your funeral. And he looked at me and he said, Phil, you make your decisions based on what's best for your immediate family, your extended family, and your close friends, not for the people who won't even think a thing about the day you die. Now, I don't know, but that helped me. But you think about that. Make your decisions based on people who come to your funeral and sit closest to your casket. And that goes a long way. Well, with all of that said, I do want to take question and answer. I won't have all the answers. I'll give you my counsel from years of 50 years and my research, particularly on prodigal kids. I've done a lot more. I share with Brother Gary today. The two things I hear a lot now is how many kids grew up in church, and after their kids were reared in church, and these are the kids talking to me, their parents have walked away. I had a guy the other day call me, and he said, my parents who reared us in church and I thought were so consistent, after 50-something years of marriage, they're getting a divorce. And he really said, you need to write a book on prodigal parents. And I thought, well, you may be right, because there's some need for that. And then there's always those people. And one of the big issues on prodigals, I didn't mention it this morning, is what's called deconstructing. Have you heard of that phrase yet? It means it's kids who are renouncing their faith. I don't even want to be a Christian. I don't even want to follow God anymore. That is an issue. A second issue that I'm hearing quite a bit about now are kids who are divorcing their parents. I don't know if that's become common here. We've got a little wave of that in Alabama. That's kids who sit down to tell their adult parents. And some of these are kids in church. That's where I'm really having a problem with this. And they'll say, I want nothing to do with you. I don't want you in my life. I don't want you in the life of my grandkids. Just leave us alone. And those are sometimes very complicated relationships. A lot of times there's a lot of unresolved hurt. Sometimes it's just kids being selfish, to be honest with you. And I tell you where I see that a lot is where there is a need to take care of a parent, like to kind of physically take care of a parent. They just abandoned ship. That's unfortunate, but that's happening as well around the country. So with all of that, I've got 3 or 4 questions I can throw out myself, but I'd like to give you a chance, first of all, just to ask anything pertaining to this morning or even what I shared tonight or something along that line. Anybody? Raise a hand. Just raise your hand and speak up. We have a microphone so everybody can hear. Don't be scared. You won't ask a dumb question, I promise. Okay? All right, go right there. Good. Good. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned being consistent and faithful to the church. When it comes to going to church, how do you separate that with family? Do you lean towards the family or church?
Be more specific.
Okay, so around Christmas time, there's a lot of gatherings with family,
Right.
and not all of the family will go to church. So do you participate with your family, or do you do the festivities at church, like Christmas Eve service, specifically?
Well, that's a good question. And I think there are some things pertaining to church, maybe Christmas Eve church service might be a good example of that, where a lot of times people have to be out of town or so forth like that. So the question is, your family's getting together Christmas Eve, and yet there's a Christmas Eve service at church. You know, the first option would be, I'd love for you guys to go with us. Let's all go together. They may say, well, don't go to church. I don't want to go. I think those are situations where that's not what I really mean when I'm saying missing church. Okay, I'm talking about like a regular Sunday morning or things that you are allowing to come that you're putting in the way of people coming to church. I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing to miss. In our area, when like our church has a Christmas Eve service, I don't think I was there last year because I think there was a family engagement, so let me be transparent on that. But those were what I call those extra things that are happening. It's wonderful. You can, and now fortunately I come from a family, my wife comes to a family who are all very involved in church. So like my brother-in-law and sister-in-laws are very involved. In fact, my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, just retired as a director of missions up in Clarksville, Georgia. He was a BSU director at Columbus University. If anybody went to Columbus University, let me know. He was there for about 30 years. His name's Tony Gray. But sometimes when they're home. So no, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about just the regular, consistent Sunday morning, Wednesday night. That was part of the routine. Now, was my dad being harsh? Some people could say yes or whatever. However, what my dad said to me, and was true, when you start making exceptions, there's always another exception. So I would say no. When the festivities, maybe you can do that. Now, sometimes it's verbalizing, okay, to say to family when everybody's trying to get together, well, if it's that time, we won't be able to come. You know what I mean? And just say, unfortunately, we won't be able to come. You don't have to judge them because they're there, but just to tell them. But sometimes it's just finding a good time. Like now with my wife's, her mother's family still gets together. Everybody can't be there, so sometimes it's okay to miss. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I don't think special occasions necessarily, that would be probably a little bit different, but I'm just talking about day in, day out priority of being at church.
Then your own convictions should override family?
No, because I think when I say conviction, it's what are your priorities, okay? And let me put it in a different way, because what I'm hearing is it's conviction versus family. I don't think it has to be that, or it's church versus family. I don't think it has to be that. And when I'm saying family, I mean by family, my wife and my kids kind of thing when you're at home, not in a broader family context. no, I don't think those have to be a contradiction. And I don't think you have to be legalistic about it. I think that's a mistake we make sometimes. We think we're being good parents because we're legalistic and the kids are going to be, shut up, we're going to church. No, no, no. You want to be in an environment where they just know you're going to church. Like, for example, I never asked my parents on Saturday night, are we going to church tomorrow? Never asked that question because I knew the answer to it. And I try to get out of church. I remember getting up on Sunday morning and playing sick. My dad said, it is your lucky day. I said, why? He said, they're having special prayer for the sick this morning. It's a good day for you. So, because I wasn't sick. So, yeah. My dad had a sense of humor in case you didn't get that. So, no, it's not a contradiction of the two. But between those, I think you get my heart, what I'm saying, okay? It's a good question. Somebody else. Right back there, okay?
How do you get like teenagers to love each other, like siblings who are together all the time?
I tell you what, if you find the answer to that, let me know, and I'll put it in a book. Let me tell you what I have found, because I see that with my grandkids. Let me be honest with you. I see that with my grandkids. And not just with them as sisters, but with their friends, okay? Literally, I kid you not. One of my granddaughters gets up every morning and texts all of her friends at school, what are you wearing today? Okay, and I'm like, seriously? And she does. Now, it's not because she doesn't want to wear what they're wearing, okay? Because, see, they've all gone to the mall together and bought the same clothes, so it's kind of whatever. I don't know. I think I would say very simple, you model it, that how do we deal with people we don't always like or people who are irritating us? Remember, we're all adults here, so you'll get this. Remember when you're talking about teenagers, there's something called hormones that are raging. Okay, and it makes them to be so, is unlogical a word? I'm not sure, or illogical, okay? I mean, I saw it with my kids. We could just be at the house, and they're like, stop looking at me. I'm like, was I looking at you? I didn't know I was looking at you, Okay, I won't look at you. And then 5 minutes later, you never look at me. I'm like, I can't win, So, and it's not just girls, by the way. It's guys, too. So I don't know if there's a real good idea of that, except modeling it for them, that when there's conflicts, here's how we can talk about it and love and appreciate them. Our two daughters, gosh, they fought all the time about everything. They were 5 years apart. They fought about everything, okay? Now they're very close, all right? But I think they were competitive, and I had to realize sometimes they were competitive for my attention because I was gone a lot. So when I was home, it was who's going to get daddy's attention. But I'm not real sure if I have a real answer other than model it for them. Talk to them about it. I think one of the biggest things I have found about life in general is we don't communicate about stuff. Sit down and have a conversation about it and do it when they want to do it. I knew over time, and even now, I knew when there's the right time to talk to my daughters. It's just an instinct you get about, you don't force it. You're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this now. That was not going to be a good conversation. But now, if one of my daughters is talking to me or I'm on the phone now, like I can almost guarantee you I'm going to be driving back to Alabama tonight. I can almost guarantee you my youngest daughter is going to call me tonight, okay? Because she knows I'm driving, all right? So she'll get the kids in the bed. Daddy's driving. It's the perfect time to call my dad. And so we'll yak about everything, okay? But some of that is conversational, talking about stuff. But if there's an issue, if there's a conflict, then you verbalize it. I think the people we're closest to are the people who know the power of communication. Whether it's a husband, wife, mom or dad, sister, brother, kids, or whatever. Communication is everything. Go back to clear. Let's be clear. Let's talk about it, Because most of the time I think kids fuss and fight in the spur of the moment, in the emotions of the moment, when they really don't mean it, but it still hurts. Yeah, so that's not very helpful, but model it. Yes, right here.
So what happens when you over-communicate with your adult children about their children?
There's the problem. The problem is not over-communicating. The problem is because it involves their kids, okay? And so what we do, to say it in a little bit of a humorous way, my biggest fear of my grandkids is I know who's raising them. Okay? You got to think about that one for just a minute, all right? I know who's taking care of my grandkids, and that can cause me some sleepless nights, okay? And so because I am more experienced, I want to speak into their parenting of their children, okay? And what I've had to learn to do, now, when the grandkids are at my house, they know who's in control. Debbie and I are in control. I don't mean if they're visiting. I'm just talking about if they're staying with us. They understand that. If you're going to stay here, we're kind of your mom and dad for the moment. But when they're there, I mean, there's times I've seen my kids discipline their kids when I wanted to intervene, go like, no, they didn't mean it, because you don't want to see them upset the kids. And I also don't want to be the person that when they get in trouble, they come run to thinking I'm going to be their advocate against their parents. Nope, we're not going to do it. I'm going to support the parents, even though I think that's not the wise decision to do. Just remember this, your kids will resent you if you try to parent their kids, all right? And as grandparents and our love for our grandkids, and sometimes if we do see some bad decision our kids are making, it's hard to do that. I have had to learn as a parent of my kids in what they're doing. I've had to learn to wait till they talk to me, and eventually they will if there's a real issue. Does that make sense? Because one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to drive a wedge between your kids. I am by nature a person who wants to help, okay? That's my nature. You can tell that in my preaching. I want to help people get from here to here. And so I have to be aware that I can have a natural conversation. I can have a conversation with somebody I don't even know. And they're like, well, geez, we're going to Disney World, and I don't know where to start. Well, the next thing out of my mouth is, well, here's how you do it. You do this, you do this, you do this, because we've been to Disney World and blah, 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 whatever. That's my nature. And my kids have had to look at me and say, we didn't ask you. We just made a comment. Okay, that's fine. I will keep my mouth shut. So, and that, I don't know if I call that over-communicating, but I do think that's important to let your kids be the parents to their kids. And sometimes when you see it's not the best decision, it's a hard decision, if there's an opportunity to do that, you do that away from the kids, never in front of the kids, and when, again, the time has to be right. And here's one of the things that I think is very good advice that I've had to learn. I have had to learn, and this is my kind of 10 for 1. If I need to talk to one of my daughters about something, and remember, one of my son-in-law works for me, okay? And so that doesn't really change the dynamics because it's a real good relationship. But sometimes my daughter makes the natural assumption he can be gone somewhere because her daddy's the boss. So sometimes I have to address it. No, he's got to be here for this, and it's like a work environment, so forth like that. But one of the things that I have learned is I need to have at least 10 good conversations with my daughters for every one conversation we need to talk about something. Does that make sense? Because if every time you're talking to your kids is about an issue with the grandkids or it's an issue about something in life, then they start resenting your phone calls because you're trying to, I'm an adult, Mom. I know what I'm doing, Mom, or Dad. I know what I'm doing. So learning to have just that good relationship along the way. And sometimes I've learned to get them and talk about it by just asking them a question. I may know that, like, one of the kids is having some struggles in school, and I'm like, well, how are they doing in school? Or Beckham, my grandson, he struggles a little bit, and he said the other day that he made a D on his test. I was real concerned. Is there something I can do to help with that? And then she may start talking to me about it, whereas I'm saying, like, look, you got to make him do his homework. You got to make him, because he doesn't like to do homework, I mean, you ever seen those kids that are just butterflies? They just love people, and they just want to be with people, and to sit down and do work, he doesn't like to do that. So I would really suggest, one of the hardest things as grandparents is to keep our mouth shut. I'm just going to be honest with you. That's the hardest thing about being a grandparent, is keeping your mouth shut, And because, again, you know who's raising your grandkids. Whew, that's a scary thought. You know what I mean? But you know what? I look back. My mother and daddy was the same way. They were worried so much about my two girls because they realized who was raising them, I guess. So, and sometimes we have to do that. I don't know if it answered your question, but yeah. All right, good question. Somebody else. We got a minute or two here. Yes, over here to the, all right, let's go back here and we'll come over here. No, go ahead.
I was was just wondering if you could speak to, we call it these young people who leave home and then maybe become prodigals. They were just borrowing their parents' faith. And so that when they went to college or went out in the real world,
Right.
or were separated from being, drugged to the church, when the doors were open and all that. Can you speak to your experience with that, and like how many of these prodigals that you interviewed or that you've counseled over the years, maybe their faith really just was that of which they were borrowing from their parents in the first place? Does
Yes.
that make sense?
I don't know if I would say it's true of all prodigals, but I will tell you this. I do know that one of the issues that we have, and in hindsight, one thing I would have done different, this is just my experience, okay, is both of my kids went to a Christian school, and I believe in Christian schools. It was a great Christian school. But at that Christian school, they were surrounded by, at least on the surface, all their teachers were Christians, and they were surrounded by, at least on the surface, they weren't all saints, trust me, but they were surrounded by kids who at least had parents who expected Christian behavior. So when our oldest daughter went to college, she was in shell shock. I'm just going to be honest. She thought she had been out, she understood. She was in shell shock because her faith had never been challenged, okay? And she loved apologetics, she studied that, but she had never been challenged. And for about 2 years, her first 2 years, she went to a Christian school. I won't say the name because of what I'm about to say, but she went to a Christian college. It was a good school, but one of her professors was undermining everything about her faith, especially on moral issues, okay? Well, see, the daddy in me is, I happen to know the president of that school, okay? So I want to call him up, get the guy fired. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I had to help her process what you were hearing. Now, since then, that professor left. He went to another school. He has since left his wife. He's now married to a man. So he is kind of, he was kept saying to my daughter, but I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. And yet he was very persuasive in putting doubts in her mind. Now, having said that, my daughter then went to the University of Alabama, which I thought, oh, Lord, she's going to get destroyed there because I went to the University of Alabama. And I thought she's going to be destroyed. But she found there a group of Christian friends who were strong believers, affiliated with them, so that they helped her process what she was hearing that was against her faith. One of the mistakes I do think we make as parents, I made the mistake, so I'm guilty here, is I thought shielding my kids from non-believing kids was healthy parenting. And I'm not sure that was right thing. I think they needed to have friends who didn't believe. They needed to have friends who came from trouble. They needed, I don't mean to run around with and go party with. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about just to have, friendships with them. Because I can't say this, and some of y'all are going to hate me if I say this, but a large percentage of kids who lose their faith are surrounded all the time by Christians. You know what I mean? And again, I'm a strong supporter of Christian schools. And I'm not anti-Christian schools. I'm not anti-public schools. But I think there has to be ways that your kids can be exposed. If for no other reason, like my kids look back now on some things we did because it was a nice thing to do. My kids loved when I would take them and we would go as a family or even as our ministry and do something at a homeless shelter. They had never been around that before. And not that it was just a one-time experience, but to get them involved in something where there's hands-on. But I would say that, and I'll say this in our church. The problem we have in churches today, that years ago we didn't have, but we have it today, is we're telling people what to believe, but we're not telling them why they need to believe it. We say, this is wrong, but we're not telling them why. And by the way, a good answer is never because God said so, which is probably somewhat of a good answer. Or, well, if you do that, these are going to be the consequences. Like I'm being honest. Our youth director drilled in us, you don't have premarital sexual relations because if you do, you might get pregnant. Well, what about the kids who did and they didn't get pregnant? Okay, there's no consequences to them? Yes, there are consequences. So it was more about teaching me why it was wrong rather than what just was wrong. Does that make? Sometimes in my mind I'm clear, and I'm not always clear to other people. So I do think we have to spend more time teaching them why. And a lot of that begins with good family conversations. You know, one of the things that Debbie and I had, and I'm going to say this, Debbie had it better than I did. To this day, our kids talk to her about everything, 3 or 4 times a day. Sometimes I have to get in line to talk to my wife, okay? Because our daughter's going to call every day from North Carolina. She's a school teacher. And we know about every kid in her class and talk to them. But that's the kind of relationship that they could talk about, and she can talk to them about the why or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a consistency that kids that are prodigals. Here's the most common reason why kids become prodigal. There is some sin they want to participate in, and they have to decide either I got to quit this sin or I've got to quit following Jesus, because those two can't go hand in hand. So they just throw their hands up and I choose my sin. 90% of the time, that's what it is. And you may never know what that sin is, but 99% of the time, that's what it is. When I meet kids, sometimes I will meet college kids who want to deconstruct. I'm walking away from my faith. So I look at them and I say, we'll have a great conversation about that, with one stipulation, that I have permission to ask you one question and you guarantee me total transparency. They'll always do it. And I'll say, what activity are you participating in on a regular basis that you know your parents and your church would view as sin? And every single time they'll tell me what it is. Most of the time it's sexual or something related to that. But it's almost like I'm walking away because I love my sin too much. So I don't know if that answers. Over here, we had somebody right here.
What do you do if
I can hear.
prodigals, you got young grandkids
Mm-hmm.
involved, and you may not like what they're seeing or experiencing?
Well,
How do you,
there's 2 levels of that. Okay, let's talk about the level up here where we're talking about what they're seeing and experiencing that would be dangerous to the grandkids, whether it's abuse or whether it's anything that would be illegal. As a grandparent, I feel I have both a biblical, moral, and legal right to verbalize if I know my grandkids are in danger. Okay? So I want to make that very clear. As grandparents, when we see things, sometimes we don't want to get involved, and make sure you got the facts, because let me tell you something. If you don't know this, your grandkids will lie to you. Make sure you get the facts, and particularly whatever. But then there's the other level, that they're doing things or hearing things or seeing things that are not illegal, but it's certainly not healthy or spiritually good for them. Again, you're kind of bound, because like I was telling her, you can't always step in and try to become the parent, because if you do, your kids will resent you, and they'll ultimately cut your grandkids off. Okay? The best way they'll deal with that is to do it. But sometime to help them. I found my dad, who you obviously know I married my dad a lot. My dad had a way of talking to me about some mistakes I made. And he always prefaced it by telling me a story. He said, I remember one time when he was little, and he would go into a story that I obviously didn't remember. Looking back, I think some of those stories were parables. He made them up to illustrate a point. But it was always something that I was doing. But he never said I was doing it. He just told me a story that he did it and how he regretted it, and here was the consequences to that. And after a while, I figured out what he was doing. But he didn't come across, because anytime somebody approaches you to tell you you're doing something wrong, your very nature is to defend yourself. So sometimes you don't want it to be adversarial, but it's hard. No, trust me, it's hard when grandkids are involved. And by the way, I'm going to take that one step further. One of the things that's hard for you as a grandparent is when your children, where there's grandkids involved especially, but when your children are going through a divorce, whatever you do, this is going to be good advice for you. Listen to me. No matter how sorry their dad or mom was, no matter how terrible their mom and dad was, it's still their flesh and blood. And never, you don't have to tell them how wonderful their dad or mom was, but don't criticize their mom and dad, because trust me, that'll come back to haunt you years from now, and they'll go tell mom and dad it didn't help none. they're not going to change. Because what happens when we have divorces? What do? You know, everybody who's for the wife tries to get everybody on their side, and everybody for the husband get them on their side. And we try to do that by criticizing. And little minds cannot process that. So that's another issue. I just don't know if there's anything beyond that you can do, to be honest with you. If it's at a harmful level, yeah, you have to intervene. Even that's hard. But if it's just what they're seeing and hearing, always remember this. When you do have those grandkids, without them realizing it, you create a different environment. Okay? And as they get older, they'll realize it's different at grandma's than it is at mom and dad's. You know what I mean? I mean, they'll start realizing the way you talk to each other, or the words that you use, or what they see, or whatever else like that is a different environment. And with time, they'll always be drawn to the one that's most loving. Love will always draw a kid in, you know, where they get what? Acceptance, approval, and security. Where those three things are, that's where they'll be drawn to. I don't know if that answered your question. Yes, ma'am.
Is there ever a good time in a biblical time to walk away from your prodigal?
Well, I don't know if I would use the term walk away. I would say sometimes you have to detach. Okay? Let me explain what I mean by that. In the story of the prodigal son, which, by the way, is a prodigal, it's a parable, it's a fictitious story, but the principles are there. The father physically, financially, and all of those ways detached himself from his son. But he did not detach spiritually or emotionally. Okay, you follow me? Meaning he let him go his way. He didn't rescue him. He let him face the consequence of his choices. But yet in his heart, he prayed for him, he kept looking for him, and he kept loving him. Now, let me say one thing about prodigals that I did not say this morning, and not to the extent maybe you're asking, but it's important. Never allow a prodigal, okay, especially if they have addictive behaviors. Never allow a prodigal, number one, to put you in any kind of risk, okay? I know we have a lady in our town right now. She's a wonderful lady. She's a godly lady. She has a son. He has a terrible drug addiction. And he comes to her and he constantly tells her, Mom, I'm going to quit if you'll just give me more money, if you just give me more money. And she's been giving him money. Well, her other kids are concerned about it. You don't need to do that. Well, she's physically scared of him. I mean, because he has a violent behavior. Well, quite honestly, the other kids are now in the process of helping her to get a, what do you call it, restraining order, because he has hit her before. She doesn't want to prosecute him, but to do that. You never put yourself in danger. And you never allow a prodigal with addictive behaviors to be able to control the whole family affairs. What I mean by that is, and you know what I mean when I say this, you have that one family member that when they show up, everybody tries to make them happy so they don't get mad and get their feelings hurt. No, you're allowing that person to control. Never let a prodigal do that. It's okay. There's a great book written by Henry Cloud that's entitled Boundaries. Have you ever heard of this book?
Yes.
Okay, some of you have it. It's a great book to read. Dr. Cloud did a wonderful job in that book on setting boundaries. It's always good to have boundaries, period. I have boundaries, okay? And boundaries are not always a bad thing. It's just boundaries. You know, when I'm in my office, my staff knows if the door's closed, that's a boundary. Don't walk in, okay? My door's open, you can walk in. That's a boundary, because I just don't need them constantly interrupting me while I'm working on something. That's a fair boundary. Again, got to communicate your boundary, right? But it's a boundary. But with prodigals, sometimes you do need boundaries. This is what you can, this is what you cannot do, so forth like that. Does that answer? But it's a great book if you've not read that book. It's a big help, okay? Somebody over here. We're running out of time, but come right here. She's been to Breckenridge.
On, you know, you have to say the 3 names before they listen.
Mm-hmm.
I need some more advice on how to get out of that.
Yeah, I tell you what you do.
How do I mean,
Before you say that, count to
if
10.
I don't lose it, they don't.
Count to 10. That sounds crazy, but it works. Count to
I
10.
counted 3, but
Well, apparently it's not working, so count to 10.
I'll figure out it.
Well, always remember this. So you obviously have small kids.
Yes.
Okay, small kids are going to push you as far as they can push you. Okay? They're going to do it. And it's just, don't worry, it's not just your kids. It's every kid in America. They're going to push you to the boundaries. Because what are they trying to do? They're trying to find their boundaries. And you have to tell them, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. You know what I mean? And these are the boundaries. You can't do it. And be consistent about it. But then count to 10, okay? Or and I'm honest, this is where my wife and I disagree. This is where my wife and I disagreed a little bit. Y'all gonna laugh, but it's true. It's probably a man-woman perspective here a little bit. But when our kids was little, I remember one time we had a iron skillet, and we would cook. You know what cornbread is, don't you? I love cornbread. So we cook cornbread. Well, when you take cornbread out, that skillet's still hot. Okay. Well, Megan, our oldest, she always wanted to help with the skillet. She always wanted, and I kept telling her, don't touch the skillet, don't touch the skillet, don't touch the skillet, it'll burn. She was determined she was going to touch the skillet. So I did it one time, and Debbie said, don't you do it? I said, I'm going to do it. So I took it, I said, don't touch the skillet. She did it anyway. It's the last time she ever touched the skillet. So sometime, burn a little hand. My wife liked to kill me, but I'm like, I hate to say that. Don't turn me in for child abuse. But my point is, sometimes you have to help them understand, but don't lose your cool. Stay. It's hard. Trust me, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. We keep our grandkids now. Sometimes it's hard. And we have all 5 of them. It's real hard because they're all, I tell them they're all A-D-D-D-D-D-D-D-D-D, and they run off each other's energy, And I wasn't making fun of that, by the way, but seriously, just like y'all sit down, And so the other night, our 2 oldest, when kids are 13, they're about to turn 14. At that age, they're adults for 5 minutes and they revert back to being kids. Y'all know what I mean at that age? The other night, they were all at our house, and the young ones, and even our 12-year-old grandson, they was all being wild, running around, all that kind of stuff. And one of the 13-year-olds said, Pops, you need to go in there and get that melatonin. Y'all know what that is? Maybe sleep. Go give him some melatonin. I'm like, you don't even know what that is. I don't know, but Mama gives it to me when I'm upset. So you got to love those moments. So I just learned to count, be patient. But just remember this. What your kids will remember is they remember your anger. Okay? You don't want them to remember your anger. You want them to remember you were consistent, you were loving, all that kind of good stuff. I used to, when our kids would get real disobedient, I'd just go sit on the floor with them. And sometimes say, my son-in-law does this, it works real well. I would sit on the floor with them after they was upset and kind of what we call in Alabama throwing a fit about something. I'd sit on the floor with them and they said, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just going to sit here till you get through. But it's not changing the rules. We're not going to change what we do because you don't want kids to react to your emotions. You want them to act to what you're telling them. That's easy said, hard to do, but you can do it.
So her second part of her question was that counting to 10 was for her or for her kids?
For you. For you, And one time my wife did something. She didn't plan it. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Our kids was doing something. She had it, and she just sat down and started crying. And she just said, yeah, I've just done everything I can do. And those kids stopped. Mama, what did we do to you? You know what I mean? And it was just, she's like, I just had it. It worked. At least that day it worked,
Have some Kleenex handy.
Because they had never seen her cry, but she has just about had it. So it was it. Just remember this. A couple other questions people want to ask, and we'll wrap it up. One question that a lot of times people ask, and I understand, and I don't know if this applies to anybody, so I don't know. But generally people want to ask, here's a very common question. I'm surprised nobody asked it tonight, but there may be somebody who wants to ask it, so I ask it for you. What do I do if my child or my grandchild announces that they are homosexual or transgender? Do I still have a relationship with them? The answer is yes. 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 Now, what you may feel an obligation to do is every time you see them, tell them what they're doing is wrong. You don't have to do that. You can make it clear one time. You just want to make sure. You see, loving someone and approving someone is two different things. You love without approval. Now, let me take that a step further. But what happens when your gay son or gay daughter wants to bring their lover home for Thanksgiving or Christmas? Okay? Here's the answer I always say, and I believe it's a biblical principle. You are responsible for your house. And you can set and say to your child, same thing would apply if it was a heterosexual who wanted to bring a boyfriend or girlfriend home with them to stay the weekend. And I mean stand in the same room together. You can say, I understand the relationship. It is not something we approve. And at our house, we can't do it. Now, if you go to their house, it's their house. Okay? You can't impose when you go to their house. All right? And that's where, now that's just my own personal counsel and advice. So what happens if the gay son or the transgender child or somebody says, well, then I'm not coming home for Christmas? That's called testing your convictions. And you have to say, son, I love you. Your mom, we love you. Love you more than life itself. However, we have to stand by what we believe. We're not being legalistic. We're not being whatever. We have to stand by what we believe. And even though they may get angry, try to punish you, deep down they will respect you. And I'll give you this illustration of that. I graduated from a rural high school. I always laugh, there were 77 people to be in my graduating class, and 7 flunked the senior year, and only 70 graduated. I don't know what they're significant about that, but I remember it. Of the 70 who graduated, 7 of us went into the ministry, and 7 came out of the closet, which really surprised us. The boy who was the senior class president of our class is today a very vocal, he lives in South Florida, he's very vocal, he's very pro-gay, he's very animate, totally opposed to everything in Christianity, totally opposed to anything to do with that. And he's very vocal about it. He's actually been on national news programs. And yet when he comes home to see his family, not every time, but sometimes he'll call and say, hey, can we have lunch? So I said to him, first time he did it, I said, sure, I'd love to see you. Love to go eat lunch with you. Now, just so you know, we went to a public restaurant in a very public place, okay, to eat lunch. And the whole time we're sitting there eating lunch, he looked at me and he said, I am shocked you're sitting here talking to me. And why would I be shocked? He's like, everybody knows I'm gay. And I looked at him, and everybody knows I'm not. And he said, but this could ruin your reputation if I'm here. And I looked at him and I said, well, let me kind of help you with that. 2 things I said you need to know. Number 1 is Jesus is my model, and they criticize Jesus for eating with sinners, and we're all sinners. But I said, so Jesus did what I'm doing. And number 2 is, I said, Mark, I've told you this before, and I'll tell you again. I will sacrifice my reputation if I knew it'd get you to Jesus. And you know what he said to me? He said, you don't love me that much. And I said, Mark, I do. But I love you with a biblical love, not with your definition of love. And I said, I really mean that. I would be willing. Paul said he was willing to go to hell to see people go to heaven. And I said, I don't want to ruin my reputation for some crazy reason, but if it gets you to Jesus, it's worth it. Now, he doesn't call me every time he comes home, but about every 2 years he wants to go eat lunch. And here's what he says to me every time we eat lunch. Do you still love me that way? And I said, of course I do. I love you because I want you to know Jesus. Now, here's why I share that story with you. He doesn't know Jesus. He grew up in church. He grew up in a Church of Christ church, but he grew up in church. He knows different. But he said to me one day, I would pay you to hate me because I cannot accept that you love me. Okay, now follow. I didn't invite him to Thanksgiving or Christmas. I'm not going on vacation with him. There's boundaries. But at least I want him to know that while I have those convictions, I still love him and see him as God sees him. That God loves him and God wants to change his life, and he would let him. And so I share that message with you, that if you have people who have those sexual issues or addiction issues or any kind of issue, you never stop loving them. You may have to say, these are some boundaries that we have set. Because you see, I know I'm digressing here a bit, but see, if you allow Uncle Joe, I'm just going to say Uncle Joe, to come with his boyfriend to Christmas dinner, they're sitting there in front of other people, and the only way they know to interpret that is you don't have a problem with this. Okay? But that's hard, and I'm not saying it's something you can do, okay? Now remember, I said the rule is your house. So what if your mom and dad said it's okay for them to come, and you're going to your mom and dad's house? That's a little different because it's not your house. The Lord holds you responsible, I believe, for your house, okay? But in so doing, you can still be loving, you can still be kind. I learn every day, I want to be the most loving and kindest to people who are diabolically opposed to everything I do. You know the reason why? Because that may be the only Jesus they ever see. And you know, whether it's parenting, she was coming in this, I'm going to tell you something that 2 years ago was my motto for 1 year. This was my motto. You ready for this? I said, Lord, my prayer for this year is I don't want anybody to cause me to act like anybody but Jesus. You think about that for a minute. Lord, I don't want anybody, I don't want to let anybody cause me to act like anybody with Jesus. My kids, my grandkids, my neighbors, whoever. And speaking of neighbors, you don't think God's got a sense of humor? You know who my backyard butts up to? The most devout Muslim family in North Alabama. He's I don't know what their ruling, whatever is, but I can't speak to his wife or kids. I can only speak to him, and that's only on certain days, okay? So it's pretty amazing. That's a challenge. Now, God's been good, because on the other side of him, he's put a guy who leads a ministry, and across the street, God's put retired IMB missionaries. We've got them surrounded. Okay? But it's really been tough, okay? And sometimes they do things that violates the codes and causes problems. He's got some trees that's over in my yard, all that. But I'm like, I don't want to let anybody make me act like anybody but Jesus, okay? And sometimes it's tough. God will test you. God has a sense of humor sometimes. But my neighbor who's retired IMB missionaries, he said, you know, God's put them here for us to love them. And when they see our love, maybe through that, and I just believe something's going to happen someday, that we'll get to do that. So, well, I don't know if I've been very helpful to you tonight. I just want to be encouraging to you, if nothing else. And let me also tell you one thing about parenting in general I would tell you to do. You may not like to read, but I would encourage you to be a reader. Find all the book I mentioned on boundaries is a good one to read. There's another one, Learn the 5 Love Languages. If you don't know the love language of your spouse, if you don't know the love language, listen, it changes everything. Even the people you love, that you work with. You'd be amazed how you can motivate people if you just learn what their love language is, okay? And Learn Love Language is a very good book that you can get. It's phenomenal. Gary Chapman wrote it. It's a great book. That's a good book to read. But read books on parenting. Learn. Listen. If you're not a reader, listen. Focus on the Family has a lot of wonderful programs. You can just go through there and click any issue and somebody will pop up. If you do Prodigal, my stuff will pop up. But something will pop up and you can just sit and listen to it because they're going to give you little nuggets, kind of like hopefully I've done tonight, little nuggets that you can go like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. See, everybody will leave here tonight. You know what you're going to remember? Rules without relationships equals rebellions. That's what you're going to remember. And if you think about it, that's a lot of truth packed into that statement. So I want you to do that, okay? Anybody got one final question? Because I know we got kids and they're getting restless and I don't want to go to heaven with all the nursery workers hating me. All right, so anybody else? Well, let me pray for you. Can I do that and pray for our family? Then Brother Gary is going to share a word and we'll be dismissed. Father, Every person sitting in this room tonight is here because they care. They care about their families, their children, their grandchildren. And Lord, I don't have all the answers, but I want tonight to be an encouragement. Lord, we're in a battle, and it is a spiritual battle. It's spiritual warfare. Lord, the enemy is not our kids or our grandkids. The enemy is the devil. And he's doing everything he can to destroy relationships and destroy lives. So, Lord, help us not to be angry with our kids or our grandkids, but to be angry with the devil who's behind so much of the sin in their life. Lord, help us not to be angry. Help us to act like Jesus. Help us to say, Lord, I need wisdom in this situation. And sometimes wisdom is not saying anything. And so, Lord, I pray that our hearts have been encouraged and that people will leave here tonight during this season when family is so much the focus, and sometimes that brings pain, sometimes it brings joy. But I pray to be a time that we all reflect on our lives so that we can have families that honor you. For Lord, the devil hates more than anything. He hates the church, but he hates the family. So help us to be faithful in our families, for it's in Christ's name. Amen and amen. All right, Brother Gary.
What do you do with a rebellious wife?
You love her.
Well, I hope some of that helped. I think there's a couple of things that I sat here and thought. I suspect that on some of our Sunday nights, we're going to have to start doing 5 love languages, sounds like. So we'll be letting you know about that. If it's kind of on our heart to do that, we'll kind of move in that direction. Parents, one thing especially, I think that Lee and I learned is you're sitting here, you've got to figure out what drives each one of your kids. You can't treat them all the same. There can't be this, the lines have got to be clear, but they got to be bold too. But the fact of the matter is with us and our 3 children, we were never able to be. You got to be consistent with each of them and where they are. You got to learn what that is. That's extremely difficult. I wish I had known some of this. But I will say this, and let me just say this, and then we've got something we want to do with you. I read something here not too long ago, and I may have mentioned it, because here's what our kids kind of put on us. Kids love to make you feel shame. And by that, I'm saying we are to love our children unconditionally. And I think everybody knows what that means, okay? Unconditionally. So when we lay these guidelines down, sometimes they will look at us and go, well, because you're doing that, you don't love me. Or if you loved me, you would accept who I am. So let's just hear me. Learn this. Unconditional love does not equate unconditional acceptance. Okay? The Bible talks about speaking the truth in love. So just because you love them unconditionally does not mean that you have to accept their behavior or their personality or whatever. And they will try their best to shame you and get you on this roller coaster of, well, what do I do? Well, here's what you do. You love them unconditionally, and you draw the lines very bold and very plain for each and every one of them. It's tough. I get that. It's tough. Because you love them doesn't mean you have to accept their behavior. Okay? Now, I'm glad my kids are grown. I'm glad my grandkids are even grown. So here's what we want to do. Jan, I need you to help me here just for a minute. Lee, if you and Cindy would go back here, Lee will tell you what to do, Cindy. Here's what we want to do. And we didn't do this morning mainly because we just wanted you to come back tonight. Phil, if you would, just very briefly, again, the three books that you have back there, would you just kind of give them an explanation of what those three are?
One book is Reaching Your Prodigal. What did I do wrong? What do I do now? Which is what I talked about this morning. But it's unpacked in a very practical way. Even like, for example, asking forgiveness. I even put in there, these are probably the responses you're going to get. Here's how you're going to respond. The second book is Beyond Betrayal. It is on people who have walked through a betrayal. Somebody has hurt you deeply. They betrayed you. How do you process that? What is forgiveness? What forgiveness is not? Because a lot of people think, and I'm going to give you one little nugget out of that. Forgiveness is something you consciously make a decision to do. Trust is something the other person has to earn. Doesn't mean you always let them back into the same level they were in your life, but that book goes into dealing with betrayal. The third book is called Stop Chasing Happy, Start Pursuing Your Purpose, where I talk about finding what God created you to do and doing it. And it's amazing when you look at the book of Philippians from that perspective. It's a little bit of a Bible study, but not like a Bible study. But I talk about, it explains a lot of what Paul said in Philippians, because Paul starts out by making it clear his purpose on earth. We all have the same mission to glorify God. We all have given a different assignment. Finding your assignment and then doing it, well, the byproduct is you will have unspeakable joy. So that one's not really relating to a specific problem, but it's a little more practical. That's what the three books are.
Okay, now that's the three. Tiffany, come here just for a minute. I need you to help Jan, okay? So you've already got something. Here's what we want to do. Because you have come tonight, we want to give you one of his books, okay? I know some of you bought some this morning. So, well, I wish I'd have known that this morning. It would save me $20. Well, you know, the man makes his living doing those sorts of things too. But give it to somebody who may need it. So here's what we want to do: one book per family. And Jan and Tiffany have a red ticket here for you. Just come by and get one, husband or wife. Come by and get one from them, and then y'all go back there and select the book that you want. Hand that to Lee or Cindy, so that we'll know how much that we owe Phil for these. But thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. And this is just kind of our way of saying we love you guys. And if there's things we can put in your hands sometimes to help you, we don't care what it costs, because that's what we're here for. So if you will see them, they will give you one of those. If you will see Lee and Cindy, then there's plenty of books back there. He has all three. Pick the one that you want. That's our gift to you for being here tonight. And we're so excited to see you and can't wait to see you again on Sunday. We're dismissed.